nine, eight, seven, six, five, four, three, two, one.
Hello and welcome to the Newchip Accelerator Q4 Online Demo Day Global Startup Conference. My name is Armando Vera Carvajal and I am the Accelerator Director here at Newchip. We're excited to have you here along with hundreds of other investors and entrepreneurs joining us from around the world today. This is our biggest demo day to date with over 100 global startups from the Newchip Accelerator pitching this entire week. Now, to kick off today, I would love to introduce a truly special guest and longtime friend, Dr. Michael Brandl. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a really, really big honor to have you here. Before we dive in, I'd love to share some details on your background, give a little bit of context to our global investor and entrepreneurial audience.
Okay, thanks, Armando.
Absolutely. So Dr. Michael Brandl is an economist who has spent his career seeking to understand how nations' economic systems interact and evolve. He's a pluralist economist, which means he does not believe in strictly following or adhering to one single economic school of thought or approach in his analysis. It also means that he seeks to incorporate the findings and insights from other fields, including history, sociology, psychology, physics, and biology in analyzing economic behavior. A winner of 40 teaching awards during his career at the University of Texas at Austin, the Ohio State University, and Rice University, Professor Brandl has lectured and consulted in Western Europe, Central and South America, and across Asia. He is the author of a leading textbook based mainly on lectures entitled Money, Banking, Financial Markets, and Institutions, now in its second edition through Cengage Publishing. Professor Brandl earned his bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and his PhD in economics from the University of Houston. He and his wife currently split their time between Houston and Columbus, Ohio. Interesting fact, I actually had the privilege of learning directly from Professor Brandl on the subjects of global finance and economics twice, back when I was a student of his at the University of Texas at Austin. And that's why this is such a special occasion to have you here, and a very rare opportunity for the world to learn from you. So thank you again for sharing your time with us today. To start this conversation, Professor Brandl, I'd like to jump right into the current state of our world. In the minds of billions of people, 2020 was supposed to be the start of a new era, of a new beginning for all. Granted, 2020 has in fact turned into the start of a very, very different time in humanity, one fraught with extraordinary challenges and adversity. Today, people everywhere are living in anxiety, fear, insecurity as to what the future really holds. So, especially from an economic and societal standpoint, what does history show us about global scenarios like the one COVID-19 has presented to us all?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, to me, what immediately leaps to mind is that we don't fall victim to the status quo bias, right? Which is just focusing on the way things are right now and thinking that's the way that they're going to continue to be. And because in fact, when you look at it, right, oftentimes what happens is, as the old saying goes, it is darkest before the dawn. That oftentimes what has happened is when we've gone through some very difficult, trying times, the outcome of them is pretty decent. I take, World War I. Right after World War I, the war to end all wars, well, it didn't turn out that way. But economically, we had the Roaring '20s. Now we overdid it a bit, but and part of the things that drove the '20s was all of the learning that we went on in terms of increasing productivity, efficiency, and manufacturing, and so on here in the U.S. and helped lead to that roaring 20s of economic boom. Even after the Second World War, right? There was this worry that we're going to slide right back into either the Great Depression all over again or immediately trip into the Third World War. We didn't, right? We had the post-World War II economic boom. But again, if we would have just focused on the way things were at that time, the gloom and doom would have overrun us. Thank goodness, right? The greatest generation didn't. Even after the inflation of the 1970s, right? And the stagflation that we thought was just going to be with us forever, like Jimmy Carter did. We, in fact, had after that, the longest peacetime economic expansion up until the 90s in the 1980s, and, the big kick in innovation. And so, it's, while it's not necessarily a guarantee, but let us be careful that we do not become obsessed with the way things are now and do too much navel gazing and that things are going to be horrible, right? And that's the great thing that entrepreneurs do, right? Is they look more into the future and think about the possibilities of what is to come, as opposed to focusing on, the obsessively focusing on, let me put it that way, the problems and the issues that we face today. So I think, coming out of this, there are going to be great opportunities as we rethink the structure of many industries. We rethink supply chains. We think, what's the next version of globalization going to be? Other countries are going to be making great strides in dealing with sustainability and the green revolution that's coming. So there are these opportunities that I believe are going to exist. So I think that's the most important thing. Let's not suffer from too much from the status quo bias.
That makes perfect sense. And, keeping your eyes on the future as well, as you mentioned, for entrepreneurs. What's interesting also is that over the past few years, let alone now in 2020, financial markets have behaved in a pretty peculiar manner, one seemingly based on the reactions, whims, and perhaps speculation of external forces. This begs the question, perhaps now more than ever, what is our market-based economic system really based on?
Yeah, man, that's a really good question. This is where being a pluralist can get you into trouble because it depends, right? It depends on who you are going to listen to, right? The traditional explanation we teach and that is dominated is the neoclassical, right? The framework of it's utility maximizing households that are trying to maximize their utility, their well-being, face certain constraints. They're rational and using all available information. And then you have profit maximizing firms that are also using all available information and seeking to, produce at a level of output that's profit maximizing. Now, not everyone believes that that's true, right? I mean, going back to the 1940s and 50s, you had people like Herbert Simon, who raised the issue of bounded rationality. That no, people can't know all of the options, all of the, what else could I do with my time, money, or firms are limited in the amount of information that they get. So they, they sometimes fall back on rules. They fall back on looking and kind of seeing what everybody else is doing, right? This is then led to behavioral finance and how are we impacted in behavioral economics, right? Of how, the psychology people use when making decisions that oftentimes make mistakes, right? I mean, you point to this, the rapid movements of financial markets currently, right? Yeah, I mean, how much of this is being driven by, we don't know, and following the herd, right? What Keynes even described this in the 1930s as the herd mentality of business people. So that's a very different view. Ultimately, right, what it comes down to is we believe that economics and our economic system seeks to satisfy as many of those unlimited human wants as possible, given the resource constraints that we have. And how do we allocate those resources efficiently and effectively? And, I think those are a really interesting question to really kind of think about. What are those resources? And one of the resources we thought that really wasn't all that limited, as I mentioned before, our natural resources, especially the environment, is starting to become a significant binding constraint. But as those constraints become binding, that creates, again, interesting opportunities for people and for firms. But that's ultimately what it's based on. How we try to analyze it, again, depends upon your different approaches that you take, and again, depending upon where you learn this stuff. You picked it up on the streets, or you may have been couched in, or everything couched within one context, which I think is ultimately dangerous, because there's so much of how the economy functions that we just simply don't know completely, because it's still a relatively young field.
Yeah, no, and it's so true. Wanted to go a little bit back. You mentioned the 1930s and 40s. Economic slumps seem to create the type of environment ripe for innovation and new ideas. And you sort of alluded to this with energy and the Green Revolution. We've had many economic busts because we have boom and bust cycles here. We've had many busts over the past century, and two of them really stand out among the rest. The Great Depression, 1930s, and the financial crisis of 2008, and the ensuing Great Recession. So from the viewpoint of an economist, what can entrepreneurs and investors learn about these major financial crises, both in terms of how we can respond to them, as well as how we could prevent them in the future?
I think one of the most important things is we've learned that people do not understand the idea that if it's too good to be true, it probably isn't true, right? Or more formally, asset bubbles still exist. Right? The problem with them is these prices are increasing irrationally. It's very, very difficult to be a contrarian and to, say, no, I think this is crazy. There's the desire to kind of explain and justify away these, irrational increases in prices. Now, some people argue that those asset bubbles are a natural progress of innovation, that what happens is, as innovation takes place, too many people rush in, things expand significantly, it all crashes, but then the good stuff is what gets left over. Bill Janaway, for example, at Cambridge, and Warburg Pincus makes this argument. Okay, I'll leave it up to the audience members to decide if they think that's true or not. In terms of anticipating them, I think that the biggest thing is to understand they will happen, and they are going to happen again, right? We went through this mythology in the 1980s and 90s that we thought that we solved the business cycle. And as you correctly point out, the answer is no, we didn't. Even though we had the great moderation in the United States and Western Europe, where the economy continued to expand, but without inflation, we had not really tamed the business cycle. We were seeing financial crises going on around the rest of the world. And so they are going to happen. So the ability to prevent them is, the best way to prevent them is if we could get people to understand not to be irrational, but that's easier said than done. Right. It's like getting people to, eat better and exercise regularly. I mean, yeah, okay, thanks. That's how we live a healthy life. But we're going to still drink too much and eat improperly. So understand that these booms and busts are going to happen, and during the boom, be careful of, if it sounds too great to be true, it probably isn't. But then when the bust hits, the answer is we want to make sure that policymakers are following the correct policies, right? That central banks do the things that they're supposed to do, increase liquidity in financial markets, make sure that the payment system continues to function. Fiscal policy goes expansionary to try to, again, get the economy moving again and not fall back into this disaster that we had of trying to worry about balancing the budget, and that can lead from one crisis to another. Austerity just simply does not work. From entrepreneurs and investors standpoint, if you see them policymakers start talking about the importance of austerity and so on while you're in the middle of a crisis or just coming out of it, watch out, because you're probably going to fall right back into it again.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And do you think that we're seeing a repeat of that today, especially with a lot of the newer digital technologies and a lot of the money that's being thrown into startups around the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, right? Part of it might be that this is just the latest innovation wave, and guess what's going to happen? We're going to get, too many people rushing in, and off it goes. The other thing that's kind of probably driving it is this global search for returns, right? Imagine you're an institutional investor in a perfect world, or when things work out normally, you want to have a nice diversified portfolio of different assets, right? So equities and debt. Well, debt now is yielding next to nothing. So if you're not investing in equities, where else are you going to go? Right? You're going to go into cash, which pays you literally nothing. You're going to go into debt, which pays you almost next to nothing, or you're going to have to take on huge amounts of risk to buy. And that's, we saw this blow up in some of the structured products. I mean, that's, risk return trade-off may not be worth it. And so you flow into, you flow into equities. But also, being smart about this, you realize that there's a home country bias. We're seeing a lot of venture capital going around the world, not just focusing on the US today, which is probably a smart thing to be doing. But it could be, and again, that's the problem with these asset bubbles, right? We only realize them once they implode. Right. It's like being at a party, right? When you're at a party and everybody's drinking too much and hanging off the chandelier, you're like, oh, it's just a great party, right? And then you wake up the next morning, you're like, oh my God, we overdid it. I'm never going to do that again. Next weekend rolls around, punch bowl comes out. Next thing you know, you're hanging off the chandelier again. It's again, in a perfectly rational world of, utility maximization, profit maximization, and solving this, with perfect information, these things never happen. It's understand, that these things are going to happen.
Right. No, and similar to what you just mentioned, you've taught for many years that we must pay attention to the signals that financial markets give us. In light of the events over the past 4 to 5 years, governmental, political, economic, societal, etc., what exactly is the market signaling to us today?
It's signaling that our policymakers, especially at central banks, should not be like old generals who are always fighting the last war, right? Central bankers fighting the last war would be continually worrying about inflation. What, a very flat yield curve is telling us, and, even though the central banks have intervened in the long end of the yield curve, is that we probably don't have to worry a great deal about inflation right now. The bigger worry is deflation. So we need to really change our thinking from what we had traditionally thought over the last 30 years or so.
That's great. So then how should entrepreneurs and investors alike interpret these market signals?
A couple of different ways. One is capital. The cost of capital is low and is probably over the next several years going to stay relatively low, right? So that's a really good thing. And the global savings is probably going to flow more and more into equities, which is going to be good for entrepreneurs. Probably more chance to get the equity financing. And despite, again, the political uncertainties that are going on here in Japan and even in Europe, equities are probably going to look like probably getting you a halfway decent return, even though global growth and focus on GDP may be the wrong variable to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. In terms of shifting this a little bit more away from the macro side of the economy, we all know that entrepreneurship is one of the most challenging paths that anyone can take in life, simply because it demands one's all, right? Creating something out of nothing. Ostensibly, most entrepreneurs wish to build businesses that will improve life and make the world a relatively better place. It goes without saying, however, that underpinning the desire to launch a business and turning it into a big success implies the maximization of major wealth and the pursuit of financial freedom. You gave a few years back an amazing TED Talk on this subject. And I wanted to ask you, why do people, especially entrepreneurs, seek to maximize their wealth?
The way I think about it, 2 reasons. One is it is easy to measure. And it's human nature to be able to want things that we can measure clearly and be able to thus achieve an objective. I want to have whatever, $500,000, $1 million in the bank, right? It's easy to measure. Second thing is that our society focuses on that. Right? In the post-World War II era, we have focused on wealth accumulation, income expansion of the individual as a measurement of success. But we also realize, as economists realize, that is very, very short-sighted, right? That there are lots of things in life and in the economy that have value that simply don't have a price tag, or it is very difficult, sometimes even impossible, to quantify the benefit of it. So just because it has a benefit or a cost does not mean one should ignore it, even though there is a tendency to be able to do that. Because if you can't, especially now, with what we said, the financialization of things, to be able to put everything into financial terms so it can show up on your Excel spreadsheet, right? Well, there's a lot of things that have benefit, whether it's friendship, whether it's the ability of doing a job that you enjoy, whether it's the idea of, the ability to use your brain, that has benefits to an individual, but you can't necessarily quantify it. And sometimes it's very dangerous to quantify it, right? Dan Ariely tells this story of the dangers of quantifying things that have benefit. He said, be careful if you have a great meal, right? And your mother-in-law prepares it. What happens at the end of that meal if you stand up and you turn to your mother-in-law and you say, "Mother, that was a great meal. Here's $75 for you." Right. Well, what happened is your father-in-law would take you outside and beat the crap out of you. Right. So you don't really want to try to quantify the benefit of everything, even though in Western society, we tend to do that. And that's a very, very dangerous way of thinking. Right. That instead, the way that economists had traditionally thought about it is that by, doing the things that you enjoy, using your tools, what Adam Smith talked about, that if markets function properly, they will reward that. And you see that with a lot of entrepreneurs. You see that with a lot of investors. Warren Buffett's a classic example of it, right? Warren Buffett is very wealthy. Why? Not because he said, "I seek to make a lot of money on my returns," right? Everybody who goes out to Omaha to talk to Warren Buffett, Buffett tells him the same thing. He says, "I made a lot of money because I just like examining companies." Right? That's what I find fun. That's what I find interesting. If I don't understand a company, I don't invest in it. And it's that simple mentality that, and I like living in Omaha, and that's why he lives in Omaha. And he has been very successful. And by the way, he's made a lot of money, and people are like, "Well, tell me your investment," and that's what it comes down to, right? And I think we've done such a horrible job of getting that across to people, right? That and I also believe that if markets are allowed to function and function properly, markets ultimately punish greed. That is what Adam Smith originally said, right? That markets don't reward, they sometimes reward greed, but ultimately if markets are allowed to function and function properly, greed is ultimately punished. It's not rewarded. So, be careful of people who are driven primarily just by wanting to make a lot of money. They tend not to be really all that successful. I mean, what the labor economists tell us is compensating people just on a monetary basis are good if the work is very labor intensive and very, drudgery. Okay, yeah, that's true. But for the things that entrepreneurs are trying to succeed at, thinking abstractly, right? Thinking about things the way other people don't think about them, looking for opportunities and so on. You can't often motivate that simply by putting a dollar sign on it, right? And I think that is something that's very, very important for entrepreneurs to understand. And, because unfortunately it gets difficult to articulate to friends and family who are sometimes wrapped up in this, "But how much money are you making doing that?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, everything will take care of itself." You look at most of the successful entrepreneurs, they're doing what they enjoy. They just happen to be making a boatload of money because the market's rewarding them for doing something, solving wants and needs. And that's ultimately, where I really truly believe this in my years and years of talking and studying entrepreneurs, that's the key. That's the key. You've got to be able to really like that market, that industry, that niche, that part that you are in. And then you think about it naturally and you get better and better at it. And the market rewards that ultimately.
Right. And that reminds me sort of that saying that if you love what you do, the money will follow. And we also say it in startups, you need to obsess over the problem, right? Like you need to absolutely love what you're trying to fix, not just being obsessed with the product itself, but the actual ramifications that it has for the problem that's represented. Because if you really are solving a true, real problem that impacts real people who seek a real solution, then, I mean, do the math. People will eventually like pay for that solution to solve that problem, and you will be rewarded.
And then you'll come up with the next idea. Right, because if you're obsessing just on this one right here, you know what's the worst thing that an entrepreneur can do is be a one-trick pony, right? I got this one product, that's it. And then I say, well, what's the next thing? Well, I don't know. But if you're always thinking about this, because what do you think about? You tend to think about the things you like, you're interested in, right? And so then it just becomes this natural. Oh yeah, then what are we gonna do? You know, with that, well, then that could lead to solving this problem, and then that, and then I was talking to these people, and then I realized I got this other problem that I can help them solve. Right? And that is the key to it, right? Or it's just like, I'm going to go where I can seem to make the most money.
Right. And that's such a good point because, I've met hundreds of different entrepreneurs around the world, and most of them, fortunately, like are passionate about solving problems. They're problem solvers by their sheer nature. But some of them are almost misaligned with what they should be pursuing. Some of them just want to get rich fast, and they think that the quickest way to achieve that success is through a startup. It's possible, right? You can make some real money, but the likelihood that you'll be creating something of real, lasting, sustainable value comes into question. And it makes me think, did Elon Musk build Tesla, SpaceX because he wanted to be a billionaire? No, I think he cared more about going to space, going to Mars, using electrical vehicles, and as a result of everything that he's doing for the market, he's getting rewarded, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. But it is so difficult, I think, or I found, to try to convince people of that, or to get them to understand it. Let me put it that way, because it is more of a, higher, I think, almost a higher level thinking that you have to get people to, as opposed to just a monetary reward, because that's so simple and so straightforward for people to understand. But do you like solving problems? Yeah. Do you like thinking about what comes next? Right. This and that's ultimately, and to think differently, right, of how everybody else thinks, which is ultimately what you also need in an entrepreneur too. But the benefits that entrepreneurs have to society are just limitless. I was a growth economist, and we know one of the things that drives long-term economic growth are new ideas and new products that are going to come from entrepreneurs. I mean, they can come from Fortune 500 companies. They can come from government-funded. Oftentimes the entrepreneurs take what the government does, but ultimately it's those entrepreneurs. So they help and are key to long-term economic growth. They're also key to short-term job creation. The vast majority of new jobs, we know, right, come from small, medium-sized companies that are growing and expanding and hiring more people. So they are fundamental to how our economic system function works. The problem is just economists don't really know how to be able to incorporate that into our formalized neoclassical optimizing mathematical frameworks. That's why economists tend to ignore it, and you really tend to not see entrepreneurship, sadly, focused upon in a lot of what we teach students in terms of economics, or even as economists talk and discuss these things, which I think is wrong. Joseph Schumpeter, way back 100 years ago, first brought up the importance of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, no, and actually you answered almost the question I was going to ask, because you've had that unique opportunity to teach at several world-renowned universities, consulted with key institutions around the world. You have a very well-rounded perspective on how the world works from an economic standpoint, and also the challenges and opportunities that exist. So, I was going to ask, what is the fundamental value of entrepreneurship for our economy today and far into the future?
Yeah, and I think it's you know, like I said, at the risk of being redundant, it is long-term. It's economic growth. You want economic growth, right? You want to make sure that our children and grandchildren live better than we do. Well, get the entrepreneurs, right? Because that's how we come up with new products and new processes and new methods to be able to solve these problems that we face. You're worried about short-term problems. You're worried about growing unemployment. You're worried about growing income inequality. Well, encourage entrepreneurship, right? And, you know, we go back to Kenosha, Wisconsin, my hometown, right, which has been in the news sadly over this last week. To a great extent, a lack of entrepreneurship there, right? They thought that, okay, in southeastern Wisconsin, the answer is, well, if we just get big companies to make investments, then that'll fix everything. So they were at Foxconn, was supposed to make this world's greatest manufacturing plant. Turned out to be a massive boondoggle. If we had taken that money, even a portion of that money, and funded entrepreneurs and funded entrepreneur training, the impact would have been so much bigger and so much more positive. But we don't. Right? And we don't like to, we just think that there's this one silver bullet to be able to solve things. And, what industries should they focus on? Get the entrepreneurs together and teach them, solving problems and, and the issues that they're going to face and so on. That's how you're going to get the economic growth and development and create these in environments where they can create networks and talk with other entrepreneurs. That's what you need for the economic growth and the job creation and so on. And we've had evidence of it. This isn't just, purely, we think this is how it works. We know that it works. And you can see that in our economic experience and in the data. Yeah, it's huge.
And I think to your point, it takes a village, right? Even for building successful startups that make a real impact in communities, building those startup communities and connecting entrepreneurs and startups with established institutions, governments, large corporations that can create ecosystems that foster that innovation, not just in main hubs like Silicon Valley, New York, Denver, Austin, but around the world, in different parts of the world. Because especially here at Newchip, we believe by sheer nature of what we're doing, being an online accelerator, that next Elon Musk, the next Steve Jobs does not have to come out of Silicon Valley or Austin or anywhere, Maine. That person can come out of middle of nowhere in Montana or Tasmania, right? And giving them the access to those skills, that education, those networks, the capital necessary to turn those ideas into a reality is missing nowadays. So
it's so true, right? And we've known this, sadly, for a very, very long period of time. Those networks become so incredibly important, right? It's so that it's like you run into a problem and like, oh, how am I going to fix this problem? Well, you need somebody to talk to be able to, oh, you ran into a similar or not dissimilar problem. How did you folks solve it? Oh, okay. I can take that idea and help to be able to fix my problem. But to do that when you're out on a, intellectual island becomes very, very difficult. But now, thanks to technology, we can connect these different parts of the world to be able to share the ideas and also, of course, to be able to spread that capital around, because we talked about before, right? It's going to have to, necessary and important to have these investments around the rest of the world so that, if a disease hits one area, it doesn't wipe out your whole supply chain. And so the importance of it is just overwhelming, but it takes a different approach in terms of the way we've always kind of have done things. And there again, we will go right back to the status quo bias, right? That we're just going to keep going the way that we're going. And so, no, I think the networks, the ability to be able to spread that capital, as long as also with the human capital, teach them, okay, so you're not reinventing the wheel all over again. You can learn from the challenges that past entrepreneurs face. That's going to be the key to getting that economic growth and that job development that entrepreneurship can provide us.
Yeah, no, very well said. What is the power of a crazy idea, in your opinion, and why do we need more crazy ideas now more than ever?
Because what is a crazy idea today is the thing that will change our life in the future, right? Go on a little trip with me. Let's go back to 1969. It's 1969. We're sitting around the living room. We're watching our little black and white television. And, we see Neil Armstrong, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, and he steps on the moon. All right. And imagine I'm sitting there and I'm like, because of that, in the near future, we will be able to have small little phones that we can carry around in our pocket. People look at you and go, Brandl, you're nuts. I say, not only in that small little thing, that phone that we put in our pocket, we will also have a computer in that small little thing. And they're like, how are you going to walk around with a phone in your pocket? It's attached to the wall. Where's the cord going to go? It would have been a crazy idea, but it is because of the technology that started with NASA and the moon launch that we got the basis for the cell phone. We got the basis for CAT scans, right? All of these things that in no way is sitting there in 1969 could we even envision had huge impact on us, right? And so it is because it was a bunch of crazy ideas that happened along the way. And it is from those crazy ideas that come to things that will enhance our standard of living, whether that's being able to get a CAT scan, whether that's being able to communicate with loved ones who live halfway around the world. I mean, my daughter right now lives in Japan, and I can, FaceTime with her. I can talk to her on the phone, which would have been something completely unheard of. Hell, when I grew up in Wisconsin and my sisters went to school in Indiana at Purdue, we couldn't even talk on the phone with them because long distance phone calls were so damn expensive in the 70s. Now I can talk to my daughter and she's halfway around the world for like literally nothing. So the impact of that, right? And it all came from people being able to ask the crazy questions, come up with the crazy ideas. Granted, not all of them are going to work. Hey, we were supposed to have flying cars by now, according to the Jetsons, damn it. Not all of them work out. But the ones that do, oh man, the ones that do. And what if those crazy questions hadn't been asked? What if those crazy ideas had been put on a shelf and, well, not everybody agrees with me, so I'm not going to follow through with that idea. Where would we be? Yeah. And that is the key, the essence of quality of life, ultimately, I believe.
Right. Yeah, no, it's so powerful to think of that and the courage, right, that an entrepreneur must have, or not just an entrepreneur, people in politics, government, across institutions, anywhere, really having the courage to believe in those ideas and to at least try them out, because, you never know how those ideas may change the world forever.
And with the understanding most of them are going to fail.
Exactly.
And that's okay.
Exactly.
Right? That's okay. If you are doing something or you're doing things and you're succeeding at every one of them, that's not a success.
Right.
That's not a success. You're not pushing yourself, and a failure of an idea of a concept is not a failure of the individual. It just, okay, that didn't work. It's a failure if you're like, oh, it didn't work, I will never try anything again. It's to learn from that. Okay, that didn't quite work out. Why did it not quite work out? Okay, so we can use that for the next time and we can get better at it and so on and come up with the next, crazy idea. And yeah, it does take courage. It does take a lot of courage. And unfortunately, it also takes a mindset that we are not encouraging in this country right now, I fear. Yeah. We are focusing on, stability. And you said, we're coming from a place of fear and anxiety and hunkering down and not willing to, it seems, or becoming less willing to come up with those crazy ideas, ask those crazy questions.
Yeah, no. And yeah, I agree. The times are definitely very challenging and extraordinary right now, but I think the fundamentals still apply. As you said, it's fundamental. Really, you need to embrace failure, right? And some people in some cultures say like, oh yeah, we love to fail, right? Well, I mean, try to succeed, right? But accept the failure as part of the process. And whenever you have a failure, it's just a lesson that you have to learn, and you should learn it, right? So that you're not repeating the same failures.
And that's why the environment and your networking becomes important, right? So you can have that support group if you will, to remind you of these things that, because society sometimes will be quick to point out, you failed.
Yeah.
I didn't fail. The idea didn't quite work out right. But, now we're going to get to the next level and the next level. And, yeah, I think the history of it is just amazing. How many of those entrepreneurs were able to succeed and continue to plug along, even though they didn't really have that environment, that network to keep them going, to think the next big crazy idea. So, let's improve on that. Right? Let's improve and make it easier for the next generation, or this current generation, to be able to take those risks, to think those big thoughts, and to be able to, okay, it doesn't work out, but to pick yourself up and try it again and again and again.
Yeah, no, I love that. What is one thing that keeps you up at night, worried about the future, that you wish other leaders in the world took seriously?
Actually, a couple of things. One is growing nationalism, and this, just looking in and us versus them. I think it's incredibly dangerous, because it doesn't lead. I mean, history shows us it doesn't end well. It ends in the different tribes fighting each other, and this is how we wind up getting shooting wars. And then the ideas don't flow, which runs the exact opposite of everything, so many of the things we've been talking about. And so that worries me a great deal, seeing the rise of nationalism in the U.S., but also in certain areas in Europe and Asia and elsewhere. Worries me a great deal. The other thing that worries me a great deal, especially here in the U.S., is the reject of science. That it is through science that we get these advancements in our in ideas and everything from the scientific method to being able to hypothesis test and the breaking down of this. Understanding, I don't want to say belief in science, is understanding of science and the scientific method, that a theory is not just a crazy ass idea somebody came up with, right? It is something that is tested outside of the sample of where you came up with the idea, and so on. And that worries me a great deal. Because we know, like in Europe, the Dark Ages, societies don't always necessarily advance. They can fall backwards. Right. And you do fall backwards when you become very, very nationalistic, and also when you start rejecting science. And those two things, worry me greatly. But that's also, I think, where, entrepreneurship can be the solution to those things by connecting people across the globe, and who come from different environments and different socioeconomic background, and to say, okay, look at what these scientists came up with. And ultimately, great entrepreneurs take these scientific discoveries and use that as a platform on which to stand to create new products and new ideas. So I believe science and entrepreneurship go hand in hand with each other, and not just, biotech and things like that, but can be used in a much a broader framework to address, a variety of social issues. And so those are the two things. I got to narrow it down that worry me: rise of nationalism and the growing, if you will, distrust of science. Primarily.
Yeah, no, very, very, very valid and real concerns that even concern me today. What does that say about the kind of future that we're building right now? And how do entrepreneurs and investors need to think about that responsibly?
That's a really good question. And again, as our economists are horrible at predicting the future, right? I mean, we're still trying to explain a lot of the past. In terms of, let me just focus on the U.S. for just a minute. I know we're talking to a global audience, but I just want to focus on the U.S. for just a second. It worries me a great deal about the future of the U.S., quite honestly. Because a lot of this, I think, comes from leaders, the leaders of the country. And we have, I believe, a leadership deficit right now. And I don't see that changing in a significant way anytime soon. And part of it, calling on sociology, has to do with generational changes. I think the baby boom generation, which I'm a part of, right? I'm 55 years old. I'm at the tail end of the baby boom generation, is a problem. Because a lot of the baby boomers are the ones that are driving this nationalism, are driving this tribalism, are driving this let's just go slow and don't bring on too fast change. And that's across the political spectrum. I think it's a systemic, cultural, generational issue. And so if that generation of baby boomers would, for lack of a better way to put it, would get out of the way, and allow the millennials and the zeros to take over, we'd probably be in a much better state. And so I think that for entrepreneurs and investors to look for that generational change to take place, and the faster it can take place, I think the better off the U.S. will be. Vis-a-vis the rest of the world, it's going to mean that with that lack of leadership coming from the U.S., both in terms of globally, politically, but also economically, that is going to allow for others to fill that void. And I'll be honest with you, I really don't think it's going to be China. I think it's going to come from some other place in the world. I just don't know where. But I really believe that just everybody turning to the U.S. and the U.S. is going to continue to be this leader is probably not going to be the case.
It makes me wonder, like, when you say the word leader, I agree that we are at an all-time deficit for leadership. But it seems like you look at institutions, universities, we're all talking about leaders. What is a leader?
Yeah, I mean, a leader is somebody who can inspire the people beneath them to make the best of their resources and to solve and a leader is going to set the agenda for those folks, right? And guide them and inspire them, not tell them what to do, right? I mean, that's a boss. We don't need bosses anymore. You need a leader to say, okay, what's our motivation? What's our direction here? But then also to be able to enrich and empower those people that are below them to be able to solve the problems and encourage them to solve the problems. And you don't get that when it's, let's go slow, let's not expect too much, incremental change, or it's certainly not, those other people who don't look like us are the enemy. And, they're just going to allow all these bad people to take over everything. I mean, how is that encouraging? How is that, setting an agenda that's positive? And I think that's ultimately what leadership, and again, I'm no leadership expert, but I think that's what leaders do, and across the spectrum, that's what they've done, from Winston Churchill. Right? Okay, yeah, he was a racist, and he believed in the colonialism of the UK. But he got him through World War II, and that's when the British people then wound up and kicked him out in 1946. But to inspire the people, right, and to survive the Battle of Britain, or Martin Luther King Jr., right, to set the stage for people and to motivate all the people. To rise up and coming together. That's what leaders are. We don't have those today. Well, we do. I think they're just younger and they're being repressed and being held back by my generation.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a very, very insightful perspective. I think we need more leaders everywhere. And I think some people think that leadership is something that you earn on a piece of paper. From an institution, but I think leadership is something that you can just do by just standing up and inspiring and being that change that people want to see. And I think entrepreneurs and investors alike are very critical to that point, to driving that next wave of leadership through innovation, to make this world a better place for all, and by inspiring people nonetheless. To close this out, I wanted to get one final thought from you. Given everything that's going on today, what is the single most important piece of advice you can offer to the next generation of entrepreneurs, innovators, and investors?
It comes from sociology, right? And that is, we are a product of our environment, for better or for worse, right? So what that means is you can control and influence your environment by controlling and influencing who are the people around you, right? Who do you surround yourself with? You want to surround yourself with people who are going to be encouraging, who you can learn from, and who will help you in solving the problems that you seek to solve. Right? If you find yourself in a toxic environment, if you find yourself surrounded by people who are the naysayers, or, you know, that this isn't going to work, you're doomed to failure, let's just, you know, keep plugging along, try to break from that environment and create a more, surround yourself with people that are going to be encouraging and be there for you when, like we talked about before, when things don't work out, because oftentimes they're not, and going to be able to help you pick yourself up, and you will be able to help pick them up. That is the most important thing, because that environment, if it's an enriching and healthy environment, can help you to overcome any obstacle you're going to run into. And it will make the successes even more joyful, because you can share them with all of the people that have been with you along that trip. And so that environment in which you find yourself and what you create is probably the most important thing, I think. And again, I'm an economist.
No, yeah, I mean, and brilliantly said. I think it's a lot about that journey, right? And how we create it and how we treat everyone along the way, right? Because going back to what you mentioned at the beginning about maximization of wealth, seeking utility instead of just dollars on a piece of paper is very important. How happy are we living our lives, and how much of a happy life are we giving others on that same journey? So
absolutely, right? I mean, if you maximize your income, you die with a big checkbook. Nobody on their tombstone is just, she had a big checking account. Yeah. Who cares? Right. I mean, but if you can, inspire people, and that's what every religion tells you, right? I mean, and there's a reason why, right? Because those religions that have succeeded down through the ages have created societies that have succeeded, right? And they all kind of come down to the same thing. And it basically is, don't be a jerk. Don't be a jerk. Help others. Help the least among you, right? And that, that is the key to a successful society, key to successful life, right? The Romans who believed in, just gorge yourself and, make as much as you possibly can. Well, look what happened to them, right? Their society died. So there's something to learn. Maybe it's anthropology from that. But it's also, I think, a lesson that in many ways we kind of have failed to learn, I think, sadly. But that doesn't mean it can't change. And, from helping others, you get so much more in return. And I think that's the key. That makes the successes so much sweeter. And when you trip, it becomes so much easier to pick yourself back up.
Yeah, I agree. Dr. Brandl, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. It's been a real pleasure. This has been such a treat for me, for everyone here who's watching around the world. These insights are going to help so many entrepreneurs and investors as well, hopefully. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for what you do. And we look forward to one day soon having you here again.
Terrific. Thank you. I appreciate it and enjoyed the chat. Good luck, everybody.